Last week, we talked about why we should care about the Black Lives Matter movement in the Caribbean, and some people pointed out my use of systematic when I meant to say systemic. So yeah, I meant to say systemic. The difference is, systematic is used to describe the way a process is done, while systemic is used to describe something inside a system. Systematic relates to an action that is done according to some system or organized method. Systemic describes something that happens inside a system or affects all part of a system. So, the word is systemic and not systematic when talking about systemic racism. It does not exist as a result of the system. It is the system. Because of that last line, I think I need to make a video specifically about that topic of systemic versus systematic. But my idea is very radical, so I need some time to work on it. This week, we're going to talk about statues. There's a global debate right now over whether various statues of historical figures should come down or not. You have Confederate statues in America, you have slave owners in the UK, and in the Caribbean, you have stuff like the Nelson statue in Barbados and Christopher Columbus in Trinidad. While a lot of what I'm saying can be applied to the broader debate, I'll be focusing mainly on the colonial and post-colonial Caribbean context. Spoiler alert, I think they should come down. But as a thought exercise, I decided to look at what other people's arguments were for leaving them up, and here's what I found. A common argument is the age-old argument that comes up every time this comes up. Removing the statues is removing our history or erasing our history. An ex-Prime Minister of Trinidad said in response to removing a statue of Christopher Columbus, "The cold fact is, we cannot wipe out our history from our memory and consciousness. Our psyche, however much we may be ashamed or proud of it, if we begin to pursue this nonsense, where do we stop? Would we stop teaching history in our classrooms, our universities, and all other institutions of learning? Will we imprison our artists, architects, our painters, and our children from reproducing a replica of the Santa Maria? It is said that those who ignore the mistakes of history are condemned to repeat them. If you do not know then, how can you prevent yourself from repeating them?" I'm not sure how the jump from removing a statue to imprisoning our artists was made, but it's this kind of logic that's used to stifle progressive discussion on these matters. Defending statues as these great tellers of our history is flawed, because statues are not good at telling us our history. The most they can do is make a simple statement, and I think it's pretty clear what that statement is to all who walk in the shadow of that former master of exploit up on a pedestal. Simply in the metaphor of putting somebody up on a pedestal, you can start to see how this is problematic. I would hope that as a society, the ones we put up on our pedestals are people to look up to. For Christopher Columbus, that's not the case. When Christopher Columbus came to the Caribbean, he came with a mandate from the king and queen, empowering him to discover and acquire certain islands and mainlands in the ocean sea, and to be admiral and viceroy and governor therein. It took me a while, but I found the logs of Christopher Columbus's voyages, and apart from his obsession with gold, he was very happy to mention how timid the natives were and how easily they could be made to work or do whatever they wanted. Columbus wasn't here to explore. He was here for power and for wealth for himself and his kingdom. And in doing that, he ushered in an age where millions of indigenous people died for that pursuit. So I'm sure we can find someone else to adorn our public spaces with, or rather, someone else. Because like we established, statues are very inefficient at telling history, and they're also just a very outdated form of public art. We can represent much more with like abstract art or something like that. Another argument I see is that this solves nothing. Statues are just a thing. Whether they're up or they're down, it doesn't matter. Nah, symbols are important. Otherwise, the statues wouldn't have been erected in the first place. So if statues are important, if they mean something, then I think it's very fair to question who they mean something to and who they're important to. If the public decides that a statue is no longer what they want to occupy their space because it no longer serves them, I think that should be enough to open up the discussion for removal. History isn't being rewritten. History is constant. It is continually being written. It's just that these next few pages might say, the people, fed up with the statue, threw it in the sea. And that's not to say that that's what I think should be done. I think the statues can go in a museum where they're properly contextualized and given all the nuance of information necessary to understand the history. I also like Banksy's suggestion of what to do with the pedestal in the middle of London after the removal of the Colston statue. He posted on his Instagram, "Here's an idea that caters for both those who miss the Colston statue and those who don't. We drag him out the water, put him back on the plinth, tie cable around his neck, and commission some life-size bronze statues of protesters in the act of pulling him down. Everyone's happy, a famous day commemorated." The outrage against colonial iconography is a response to our public spaces being occupied by monuments to slavery, genocide, colonialism, and imperialism. It's only natural. People have learned their history and want to move forward. The idea of removing symbols that no longer represent the people needs to be something that we can discuss and decide upon. But that's just me, that's what I think. We can continue the discussion in the comments. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to me on YouTube, or I guess follow me on Instagram, because that's where most of y'all are probably watching this. Yeah, what should I talk about next?